Well, it's time for another GPU launch, and I know it's probably going through your minds right now. This is yet again another graphics card that I just can't buy. I mean, we'll just have to wait and see what the stock situation is like for the RTX 3060, and I'm just gonna cross my fingers and hope that a miracle happens. Anyways, just like our last GPU reviews, this video isn't gonna be a typical performance overview. I'm sure there's gonna be plenty of them out there on the internet. But I will be focusing on our usual benchmarks, but I also want to talk about what an upgrade path would look like for someone who is hanging on to an older card. You see, the simple fact is a lot of folks with 60 series cards just skipped over the RTX 2060s, and with good reason too. I mean, even more than 4 years after it was released, the GTX 1060 is still the #1 in the Steam hardware charts. But now with the RTX 3060, it might finally be time to step up, but I also wanted to take a further step back by also talking about what this means for you guys who are still rocking a GTX 960 or a GTX 970. So if you like this approach, please let me know in the comments down below. But first, a quick message from our sponsor. Productivity is choosing to get things done on time, and finding the right tool for the right task is important. You want a display that's big enough to accommodate your content, but also color accurate to put a smile on your face. Build quality that defines exceptional craftsmanship, but also light enough to accommodate you during travel. Performance that speeds up your workflow with Intel's 11th Gen Core series processors, and the battery life that lasts you for an entire day thanks to Intel's Evo certification, along with flexible connectivity like Thunderbolt 4 and HDMI to expand your lifestyle. Meet the Razer Book 13, the ultimate productivity laptop. All right, before getting the benchmarks, let's take care of some house cleaning business and bring you guys up to speed about what the RTX 3060 is all about. It's significantly cut down from the RTX 3060 Ti, but I guess that's expected since it costs $70 less. The question is whether or not those cuts went too deep, but at least board power is only around 170 watts. One interesting thing is the 192-bit bus meant either 6 GB or 12 GB of memory. With AMD's current and upcoming cards rocking huge memory sizes, NVIDIA really couldn't have this go down to 6 GB, so the RTX 3060 has more memory than the RTX 3080. With a starting price of $330, there's no doubt that demand will be way higher than supply, even though NVIDIA is using algorithm detection to cut Ethereum mining hash rates in half. And I want to jump onto that right away because NVIDIA is claiming that they're cutting mining performance on the RTX 3060 to get this GPU into the hands of more gamers. That plan might work, but there are two problems that I see with this. First is that they're actually penalizing gamers who want to mine with their GPU in their spare time. And second, even at half the speed, this GPU is still going to be turning profit in under a year. So I don't think this short-term solution will really do all that much. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the EVGA card that we'll be using here, since this GPU is supposed to hit that sweet $330 MSRP, technically, without crazy retailer markups. Now, this is a pretty compact 8-inch GPU with a dual-slot heatsink, a single 8-pin power input, and thankfully, it's not one of those crazy designs EVGA has been pumping out lately. All in all, it looks like a good in-place replacement or upgrade for literally any chassis, and that's important since some of the other 3060 cards that I've been seeing are ginormous. But I guess the most important thing that we need to set here is a baseline to see how this card actually performs against other current generation GPUs. And to do that, we're using our usual test system sporting the AMD 5900X, and since this card's meant to bridge the 1080p and 1440p performance spaces, both of those resolutions will be tested. So let's get through this. I'm going to throw in some background music, and feel free to pause if you want to look at a particular or a specific result. Okay, so let's put this into a bit clearer perspective by looking at some averages. Overall, at 1080p, the RTX 3060 rides the gap right between the RTX 2060 Super and the RTX 2070 Super, which is about what we'd expect. Remember, the RTX 3060 Ti took over from the RTX 2060 Super at the $400 price point, and it's a good 30% faster, but the 3060 to 2060 gap is about 20%. So it's not all that much, and that's going to be a bit of a letdown, but it's also not like every RTX 2060 user is going to look into upgrade to the RTX 3060, and they shouldn't. At 1440p, it's pretty much the same too, and I've got to admit, it came as a bit of a disappointment since we're so used to the 3000 series delivering such massive uplifts versus the previous generation. But then again, it's also important to remember that the 3060 costs a good $20 less than the 2060 did when it was launched, so there's that. But looking at things from a value perspective, the RTX 3060 delivers consistently good frame rates for its price. There's a super obvious linear increase here as well. You pay 20% more for the 3060 Ti and get about 20% more performance. Period. Also, remember that we're going with launch prices and not the inflated madness that we're seeing right now. So basically what I'm trying to say is everything that I just mentioned right now gets thrown out of the window if you end up overpaying for your GPU, which nobody should. Meanwhile, ray tracing performance is closer to the RTX 2070 Super, which was pretty much expected given the updates with second generation RT cores. Performance isn't anywhere near regular rasterization, but at least there's a way to check out what all the fuzz is about at playable frame rates. By using the GA106 core, NVIDIA's actually been able to cut down power consumption by quite a bit when compared to the RTX 3060 Ti, at least on the average consumption side. But there's more to it than that, especially if you're looking to upgrade an older system that might not have a super modern power supply. And that's where RTX cards might cause a few headaches for GTX 900 and 1000 series owners, especially if you look at the peak power number on this EVGA card. If you have a good 500 watt PSU, then you should be just fine. But these numbers need to be taken into account before just assuming an RTX 3060 is a drop-in upgrade. Also, don't forget that most, if not all RTX 3060 cards need an 8-pin connector, and they don't come with an adapter, and not all PSUs from years ago come with one, so that could be an additional expense. So I guess that brings me to the part that I'm sure a lot of you skipped to. It's time to talk about the upgrade path for these cards. What kind of performance can you expect? Well, we used the exact same system as before and brought a few cards out of retirement. So that includes the GTX 1060 6GB, a GTX 970, and finally, a GTX 960. Now, this lineup led both Mike and I into a conversation about price creep of NVIDIA's 60 series cards. Today, the RTX 3060 is being launched at $330 US, which might not seem like a lot when compared to the overpriced RTX 2060. But if you're coming from a GTX 1060 6GB from 4 years ago, man, it's a whole lot more to pay. And if you compare that to the GTX 960's $200 launch price, I think it drives that point home even more. The RTX 3060 is in a whole other price range. As a matter of fact, that's the same street price as the GTX 970 when that was launched. So now that the stage has been set, let's go through this starting at 1080p. Also remember that these results were run at the highest detail levels. So just remember, turning down some of the settings will actually allow some of the older cards to perform better. Either way, it's pretty obvious that the GTX 960 simply can't keep up with the other cards, mostly because of its 2GB memory size, which actually locks it out of playing some games at our settings. The GTX 970 is pretty impressive given its age, and it's a bit of a fair comparison to the RTX 3060. Both launched at the same price of $330, and even though the 970 ended up being a super controversial card, it's hard to complain about how well it's holding up. But the older cards do still handle themselves pretty well in online shooters by delivering a perfectly playable experience. But ultra-high frame rates do give a competitive advantage in FPS games. I have to say though, that GTX 1060, it's such an impressive card at 1080p, and you can see why people are still hanging on to them. But while the move from it to the RTX 2060 was tough to justify, the 3060 gets almost exactly double the performance. Moving away from 1080p to 1440p shows where the real advantages for the newer cards are, especially with the new RTX 3060. If you're still sitting at 1080p, the GTX 960 might be showing its age, but that's nothing a few lower settings won't fix. If you want to make a jump to a high resolution monitor though, it's just not going to cut it. The GTX 970 fares a lot better, even with its odd memory layout of not quite 4 gigabytes, but even then, jumping up to an RTX 3060 would give a night and day difference in visuals and frame rates. The funny thing is, even here, the 1060 proves why it was one of the best GPUs NVIDIA's ever produced. It's aged like fine wine, but it does tend to run out of steam in some games here. It's a laser-targeted 1080p gaming card, whereas the RTX 3060 is a lot more versatile for a wider range of resolutions. On the flip side, there's just no way I'd upgrade from an RTX 2060 to this card. The benefits are just not worth it. So the RTX 3060 delivering such high results against older cards on a modern system, I'm sure a lot of you guys are probably wondering what happens when you simply drop this thing into an existing PC. Would there be a CPU bottleneck or not? Well, we've got you covered here as well, with a pretty upper mid-level system right out of 2015 and something which might have been paired up with a GTX 970 or 960. I already covered the CPU bottleneck on higher-end RTX 3000 GPUs, and you can check out that video right up here in this corner. So these results were pretty much expected. At higher detail settings, even at 1080p, you will be giving up some performance for this GPU, especially in online shooters. But move to 1440p, which moves even more load to the GPU, and the gap narrows even further. So until the supply of new processors improves, at least you can get a nice upgrade while you wait for a larger system upgrade. Well, I guess that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in this video, and I think my conclusion is pretty obvious. RTX 2060 owners, there's absolutely no reason to upgrade to the RTX 3060. This card isn't for you. The RTX 3060 caters to the usual mid-range GPU upgrade cycle of between 3 to 4 years. People in this price bracket just aren't looking to jump to a new card every other year. And in that case, it does pretty well, but please just don't end up paying scalper prices for one. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you were able to take away something from this video. But yeah, stay safe and spend responsibly.